I still remember the weight of that morning, the kind of quiet that sits heavy on your chest, you know? It was supposed to be just another Tuesday, another shift, another routine patrol with my partner, Luna. But there's something they don't tell you when you become a K9 handler. Some days, your dog sees things you can't. And when they do, everything changes. We'd been together for 3 years, Luna and I. She wasn't just my working dog. She was my lifeline, my constant, the one who knew me better than anyone else ever could. I'd learned to read every twitch of her ear, every subtle shift in her posture. That morning, we were running drills near the old Miller property, where abandoned barns dot the landscape like forgotten memories. The sun was barely up, painting everything in that soft, golden light that makes you feel like maybe the world isn't so broken after all. Then Luna stopped. Just froze. Her entire body went rigid, and I felt my stomach drop because I knew that stance. Something was wrong. She looked back at me with those deep brown eyes, and I swear I saw something there I'd never seen before. Urgency mixed with something almost like pleading. Before I could give the command, she was moving, pulling toward this weathered barn I'd passed 100 times without a second thought. My training said to call it in, wait for backup, follow protocol. But Luna was already disappearing through a gap in the barn door, and every instinct I had as her partner screamed at me to follow. So I did. I pushed through that splintered wood into darkness that smelled of hay and rust and something else, something that made my heart race. And if you're finding yourself drawn into this story, wondering what happened next, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share real stories of courage, connection, and the unexpected moments that change us forever. I couldn't see Luna at first, just heard her whimpering from somewhere deep in the shadows. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, dust particles dancing in the light, and I moved forward on instinct alone. Every step felt like walking into the unknown, trusting completely in a bond I couldn't explain, but knew was unbreakable. My hand trembled as I called her name, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Luna, where are you, girl?" That's when I heard it. A sound that stopped me cold. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just Luna's whimpering anymore. There was something else. Something that made every hair on the back of my neck stand on end. A faint, almost imperceptible sound cutting through the silence of that barn. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks in the darkness. But Luna heard it too. She was circling now, her body tense, her focus laser-sharp on a corner of the barn I could barely make out. This is what they train you for, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the moment when your dog's instinct overrides everything else. When their nose catches something so compelling, so urgent, that they become a force of nature you can only follow. Luna wasn't aggressive. She wasn't in attack mode. This was different. This was her telling me, pleading with me, "There's something here. Someone needs us." I moved closer, my flashlight sweeping across rotted hay bales and rusted farm equipment that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Luna was pawing at something now, her whines becoming more insistent, more desperate. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Part of me wanted to run, to get out of there and call for help. But Luna wouldn't leave. She planted herself there like a sentinel, looking back at me with those eyes that held so much intelligence, so much determination. "Okay, girl," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Show me." She led me to what looked like an old tarp, covered in years of dust and debris. The smell was stronger here, not decay, but something musty, forgotten. Luna nosed at the edge of the tarp, then looked up at me again, waiting, trusting that I would understand. And God, in that moment, I felt the weight of that trust like never before. This wasn't about commands or training exercises. This was about faith. Her faith in me to do the right thing, to see what she was seeing, to act. My hands were trembling as I reached down and grabbed the corner of that tarp. Every terrible possibility ran through my mind. You work in law enforcement long enough, you see things. You imagine the worst, because sometimes the worst is exactly what you find. But I couldn't let Luna down. I wouldn't. She'd never let me down, not once in 3 years. I pulled back the tarp slowly, inch by inch, my flashlight beam revealing what lay beneath. And when I saw it, when I finally understood what Luna had been trying to tell me, my knees almost gave out. Tears sprang to my eyes instantly, blurring my vision. I dropped down beside her, my hand finding her fur, gripping it like an anchor. "Good girl," I choked out. "Oh, Luna, good girl." Because there, huddled in the darkness, shivering and frightened beyond measure, were 3 sets of eyes staring back at me. Small, terrified, alive. I couldn't move at first, couldn't breathe. My mind was trying to process what I was seeing, but it felt like reality had shifted somehow, like I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. I could barely make out in the dim light. They were huddled together in a makeshift shelter someone had created beneath that tarp, surrounded by empty water bottles and food wrappers. Their clothes were dirty, their faces smudged with grime and streaked with tears. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. The barn felt different now. What had seemed like just an abandoned structure moments before suddenly revealed itself as something far more sinister. I swept my flashlight across the space, taking in details I'd missed in my initial panic. Blankets, a battery-powered lantern that had long since died, a small backpack, and chains. God, there were chains bolted to one of the support beams, though mercifully they weren't attached to the children. Not anymore. My training kicked in, but it felt distant, like I was moving through water. "It's okay," I heard myself saying, my voice barely steady. "I'm a police officer. You're safe now. You're safe." But even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they could possibly believe me. How long had they been here? How long had they been waiting for someone to find them, losing hope with each passing hour? The youngest girl, she couldn't have been more than 5, let out a small sob and tried to burrow deeper into the older girl's embrace. Luna, sensing their fear, did something that made my heart crack wide open. She lowered herself to the ground, moving slowly, carefully, until she was lying flat on her belly. Then she crawled toward them, inch by inch, her tail giving the gentlest wag. Not threatening, just present, offering comfort in the only way she knew how. I watched through tears as the boy, maybe 8 years old, tentatively reached out a shaking hand toward Luna. His fingers disappeared into her fur, and I saw his shoulders start to shake with silent sobs. Luna stayed perfectly still, letting him hold on to her, giving him something solid and warm and real in the midst of whatever horror they'd endured. "I need to call for help," I told them softly, pulling out my radio with trembling hands. "More officers are coming, and paramedics, people who are going to take care of you. But I promise you, I promise, no one is going to hurt you. Not anymore." As I called it in, my voice breaking as I reported what I'd found, I took in more of the scene. There was a bucket in the corner that had been used as a makeshift toilet. A pile of thin blankets that looked wholly inadequate for the cold nights we'd been having. Evidence of someone bringing them food and water, but barely enough. Someone had kept them here. Someone had hidden them away in this forgotten place, and the thought made rage burn through my chest alongside the grief. The oldest girl finally spoke, her voice hoarse and small. Is he gone? The man? My blood ran cold. There's no one here but us, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as my mind raced. Can you tell me how long you've been here? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know. Days. Maybe more. We thought... Her voice broke. We thought no one would find us. I moved closer, slowly, the way Luna had. But we did find you. Luna found you. And I swear to you, on everything I am, you're going home. All of you. I didn't even know if they had homes to go back to, but in that moment, I would have moved heaven and earth to make it true. The sound of sirens in the distance had never been so beautiful. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Backup arrived with a thunder of footsteps and radio chatter that seemed to shatter the eerie stillness of that barn. Paramedics rushed in with their equipment, their professional calm a stark contrast to the chaos I felt inside. But as they approached the children, I saw something that broke through my shock. The kids recoiled, pressing themselves further back against the wall, their eyes wide with fresh terror. Wait, I said, holding up my hand. Just give them a second. Because here's what I was beginning to understand. This wasn't a simple case of lost children, or even a custody dispute gone wrong. The evidence scattered around that barn was telling a story that made my stomach turn. As the crime scene investigators began their work, cataloging every detail, the picture became clearer and more horrifying with each passing moment. The children had been reported missing, not together. That was the thing that made it all click into place, with sickening clarity. 3 separate missing persons cases from 3 different towns within a 50-mile radius, spanning the last 2 weeks. Emily, age 9, Jackson, age 7, and little Sophie, who had just turned 6 2 days before she disappeared. Their faces had been on the news, on social media, on flyers stapled to every telephone pole in the county. And they'd been here, hidden in plain sight, in a barn that sat on property so remote that no one had thought to check it. Detective Morrison arrived and pulled me aside while the paramedics worked to gain the children's trust. His face was grim as he walked me through what they were finding. There's evidence someone was planning to move them, he said quietly. We found a van parked about a quarter mile from here, hidden in the trees, false plates, child restraints in the back, and a burner phone with messages. He stopped, his jaw clenching. We're tracking the numbers now. I felt sick. Luna pressed against my leg, sensing my distress, and I reached down to steady myself with her warmth. What about their families? I asked. Already being contacted, they're on their way. He looked at the children, then back at me. Officer Reeves, if you and Luna hadn't been running drills out here this morning, if she hadn't picked up their scent... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The reality of what could have happened, what almost happened, hit me like a physical blow. That van. Those messages. Someone had been planning something, and time had been running out. Luna had known. Somehow, impossibly, she had known. As the investigation unfolded around us, more pieces fell into place. The children, through trembling voices and tears, told us what they could remember. A man, they only ever saw him briefly, his face mostly hidden. He'd taken them at different times, different places, but brought them all here. told them to be quiet, brought them just enough food and water to survive. The oldest girl, Emily, had tried to keep the younger ones calm, had told them stories and sang songs in whispers to drown out their fear. She'd been the one to find a loose board in the wall and scrape help into it with a nail, hoping against hope that someone would see. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came when investigators found a calendar hidden behind some equipment. Dates were marked, circled. Today's date had a note: transport. We'd found them mere hours before they would have been moved. To where, we could only imagine, and the thought was too dark to dwell on. Sophie, the youngest, had finally allowed a paramedic to examine her, but only if Luna stayed close. The dog lay beside the little girl as gentle hands checked for injuries, her presence providing more comfort than any words could. I watched as Sophie's small fingers twisted in Luna's fur, and I understood in that moment that we hadn't just found these children. Luna had saved them. Her instinct, her determination, her refusal to leave that barn. It had saved 3 lives. "The families are here," someone called out, and suddenly the barn that had held so much darkness was filled with the sounds of reunion. Mothers crying out their children's names, fathers running with arms outstretched, siblings and grandparents and people who'd thought they'd never see their babies again. Emily's mother collapsed to her knees, pulling her daughter into an embrace so tight it looked like she'd never let go. Jackson's father's sobs echoed off the barn walls as he held his son. And Sophie's parents, both of them, cradled their little girl between them, their tears falling into her hair. I stood back, Luna at my side, and watched these moments of impossible joy rising from unspeakable horror. My hand was still shaking as I stroked Luna's head. "You did this," I whispered to her. "You beautiful, perfect girl. You did this." She looked up at me with those knowing eyes, and I swear she understood. Not just what she'd done, but what it meant. 3 children going home, 3 families made whole again. All because she'd trusted her instincts and refused to walk away. In all my years in law enforcement, I'd been taught protocols, procedures, chains of command. I'd learned to trust my training, to follow the rules, to wait for backup. But standing in that barn, watching those families hold their children like they were afraid they might disappear again, I realized something profound. All my training would have meant nothing without the trust between Luna and me. You see, people always ask what makes a good K-9 handler. They think it's about control, about commands, about being the alpha. But they're wrong. It's about something much deeper, much more fragile and precious. It's about building a bond so strong that when your dog tells you something's wrong, you don't question it. You don't hesitate. You listen. Even when logic says to call it in and wait. Even when protocol says to hold position. Even when your brain is screaming that you're probably chasing nothing. I kept replaying those moments in my mind. Luna's sudden freeze, that look she gave me over her shoulder. If I'd dismissed it, if I'd thought, it's probably just a raccoon, or we'll check it out after we finish the drill, those children would be gone. Vanished. That van would have pulled away from those trees, and Emily, Jackson, and Sophie would have become statistics, cold cases, faces on aging missing posters that people eventually stop seeing. But I didn't dismiss it. And the reason I didn't is because Luna and I had spent 3 years building something that went beyond obedience training. We'd built trust. I remember the early days with her, when she was still learning, still testing boundaries. I remember the late nights I spent studying her body language, learning to read the subtle differences between "I'm alert" and "I'm alarmed." The hours we spent together, not training, just being, playing fetch in my backyard, her sleeping at the foot of my bed, long drives where I'd talk to her about everything and nothing, and she'd listen with those attentive ears, her head tilted like she understood every word. My supervisor used to tell me I was too attached. "She's a working dog, Reeves, not a pet," he'd say. But he was wrong. She's both. She's everything. And that attachment, that love, that unshakable bond, that's exactly what made us effective. Because when Luna looked at me in front of that barn, she wasn't just a dog following scent trails. She was my partner telling me, with every fiber of her being, "Trust me. I need you to trust me right now." And I did. Detective Morrison said it was Luna's training that saved those kids. The media would eventually say it was her superior canine instincts. But I know the truth. It was trust. It was the fact that when she pulled toward that barn, I didn't pull back. When she disappeared through that door, I followed without question. When she whimpered in the darkness, I knew she was calling me to something important, not just chasing shadows. That's the thing they don't put in the training manuals. They teach you hand signals and commands. They teach you about scent detection and tracking protocols. But they can't teach you the moment when you have to choose between the rule book and your gut, between waiting for backup and following your partner into the unknown, between professional detachment and the kind of trust that only comes from truly knowing another soul. I watched Emily's mother approach me later, her daughter's hand clutched tightly in hers. She was crying again, but these were different tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for finding her, for bringing her back to me." But I shook my head, kneeling down so I could look Emily in the eye. "This brave girl right here," I said, gesturing to Luna. "She's the one who found you. She knew you were there when I didn't. She wouldn't give up until I followed." I looked up at Emily's mother. I just trusted her enough to listen. Emily reached out and wrapped her arms around Luna's neck, burying her face in her fur. Luna stood perfectly still, accepting the embrace with the kind of gentle dignity that still takes my breath away. "She's a hero," Emily whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, she is." But here's what I wanted to tell Emily, what I wanted to tell everyone who would later hear this story. Luna's heroism wasn't just in her nose or her training. It was in the fact that she trusted me to trust her. She believed that if she showed me something was wrong, I would act. That's a two-way street. That's a partnership in the truest sense of the word. Later, as we finally left that barn, Luna exhausted but calm at my side, I thought about all the handlers I'd known who treated their canines as tools, as equipment with fur. And I felt a deep sadness for what they were missing. Because this connection that had saved 3 lives, it doesn't come from dominance or control. It comes from mutual respect, from love, from knowing that your partner, whether they have 2 legs or 4, has your back completely. I stopped and knelt down, taking Luna's face in my hands. Her tail wagged slowly, her eyes meeting mine with that infinite patience and understanding. "I will always trust you," I told her. "Always. You hear me? Whatever you need to show me, wherever you need to take me, I'll follow." She licked my face, and I laughed through my tears. Because that's the thing about trust. Once you've experienced it at this level, once you've seen what it can accomplish, you can never take it for granted again. Those 3 children were alive because I'd learned to listen to my dog. But more than that, they were alive because Luna had learned that I would listen. That's the difference between a handler and a partner. That's the difference between going through the motions and truly connecting with another being. And as we walked back to our patrol car, the morning sun now fully risen and painting everything in warm light, I made myself a promise. I would never, ever ignore what Luna was trying to tell me. Not ever again. Because trust, I'd learned, isn't just important. Sometimes it's everything. The barn became a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape that snapped in the wind like a warning. But for me, the real investigation was just beginning, and it would consume every waking moment for weeks to come. What had started as a miracle rescue quickly transformed into something darker, more complex, a web of horror that stretched further than any of us had initially imagined. I wasn't supposed to be involved beyond my initial report. Standard procedure. The handler who finds evidence steps back, lets the detectives do their work. But Detective Morrison pulled strings to keep me on the case, at least peripherally. "Those kids trust you," he said. "And more importantly, they trust Luna. We might need that." He was right. In the days that followed, as specialists tried to interview Emily, Jackson, and Sophie, the children would often shut down, retreating into themselves, their trauma forming walls that even the most experienced child psychologists struggled to breach. But when I brought Luna to the Family Advocacy Center, something shifted. Sophie would only talk if Luna's head was resting in her lap. Jackson needed to hold Luna's leash while he spoke, as if that physical connection to her gave him the courage to remember. Emily would whisper the hardest parts directly into Luna's ear, as though the dog could carry the weight of those words better than any human. Through their fragmented accounts, aided by Luna's gentle presence, we began to piece together what had happened. The man, they'd never seen his face clearly, he always wore a mask, had taken them from different locations using different methods. Emily from a park where she'd been playing, Jackson from his own front yard while his mother was inside for just 2 minutes, Sophie from outside a grocery store while her father loaded bags into the car. Quick, professional, terrifying in its efficiency. But the investigation revealed something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't his first time. The FBI got involved within 48 hours, and what they found sent shockwaves through every law enforcement agency in the region. The van we'd discovered had been traced back to a shell company. The burner phone contained communications with at least 3 other numbers, and forensic evidence from the barn, DNA, fingerprints, fibers, connected our suspect to 2 other missing children cases from neighboring states. Cases that hadn't had happy endings. I sat in on the briefing where they laid it all out. Photos on the board, timelines, maps with pins marking disappearances going back 3 years. Agent Carson from the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit pointed to the pattern. "He's been escalating," she said, her voice clinical but her eyes betrayed her emotion. "Started with single victims, held for 24 to 48 hours before moving them to secondary locations we've never found. But this time he took 3, kept them longer, changed his pattern." "Why?" someone asked. "We think he was building inventory," Carson said, and I had to leave the room. Luna followed me into the hallway where I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, trying not to vomit. Inventory. They'd called those children inventory. But here's what kept me going. What kept all of us going. We had a chance to stop him. The calendar we'd found, the messages on the burner phone, the van with its false plates. It was all evidence, all threads we could pull. A task force formed, bringing together local police, state investigators, FBI agents. I watched them work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, everyone understanding that we were racing against time. Because whoever this man was, he knew we'd found his hiding place. He knew his operation was compromised. And men like him don't just disappear quietly. Luna and I became part of the search effort in an unexpected way. The theory was that our suspect had scouted multiple locations, possibly had other hiding spots prepared. So we drove, day after day, checking abandoned properties within a 100-mile radius. Every old barn, every vacant warehouse, every forgotten structure that could conceal the unthinkable. Luna would search each one with the same intensity she'd shown that first morning, and I would watch her carefully, looking for that telltale shift in her demeanor that said she'd found something. We found disturbing evidence in 2 other locations. Not children, thank God, but signs that spaces had been prepared. Modified. Chains bolted to walls. Supplies stored. It painted a picture of premeditation that was chilling in its thoroughness. Each discovery was catalogued, analyzed, added to the growing case file. The breakthrough came on day 12. A traffic camera had caught the van 3 weeks earlier, and facial recognition software had matched the driver to a man named Richard Calloway, 43, with a record of minor offenses, but nothing that had flagged him as a predator. He'd been living under an assumed name in a small rental house 40 miles from the barn. By the time we got there, he was gone. But he'd left in a hurry. I'll never forget standing in that house with Detective Morrison and the FBI team. It looked so normal. A worn couch, dishes in the sink. But in the basement, behind a locked door, they found his planning room. Maps with schools marked. Photographs of children he'd been watching. A calendar with dates and times. And a list, God help us, a list of names with check marks beside some and question marks beside others. Emily, Jackson, and Sophie were on that list. So were 6 other children who were still safe, still unaware they'd been targeted. "We need to find him now," Agent Carson said, her jaw tight. "He knows we're closing in. Men like this, when they're cornered, they either run or they escalate." The manhunt intensified. His photo was everywhere. News broadcasts, social media, Amber Alerts sent to every phone in 3 states. Tips flooded in, hundreds of them. Most led nowhere, but we chased every single one because we couldn't afford to miss the one that mattered. Luna and I were called to check a reported sighting at a rest stop near the state border. It turned out to be a false alarm, but as we were leaving, Luna alerted on a car in the parking lot. My heart stopped. The vehicle was empty, but inside we found a child's backpack that didn't belong to the car's owner. It matched the description of one belonging to a girl who'd been reported missing 2 years ago, one of the cold cases that had been connected to Calloway. It wasn't him. He wasn't there. But it was another piece of evidence, another thread connecting him to crimes we were still uncovering. And it meant that somewhere, somehow, he was still out there. Still a threat. The parents of Emily, Jackson, and Sophie were kept updated throughout the investigation. I saw them at the police station frequently. They wanted to be close, to know the moment we caught him. Emily's mother thanked me every single time she saw me, but her eyes held a terror that wouldn't fade until Calloway was in custody. "He's still out there," she'd say. "What if he comes back? What if he tries again?" I couldn't promise her he wouldn't. All I could promise was that we wouldn't stop looking, that every officer, every agent, every handler like me was committed to finding him, that Luna had started something that day in the barn, and we were going to finish it. On day 17, a tip came in from a motel clerk in a border town. A man matching Calloway's description had checked in, paying cash, keeping to himself. By the time the tactical team arrived, he was already gone. But he'd left behind a laptop. And what they found on that laptop would lead to the arrest of 3 other men, the rescue of 2 more children, and the solving of cases spanning 5 states. But Calloway himself remained at large, a ghost, a shadow. A monster who'd slipped through our fingers. The investigation continued, would continue for months. But those three children, Emily, Jackson, and Sophie, they were home. They were safe. They were beginning the long process of healing, surrounded by families who loved them and professionals who understood trauma. And every step of that investigation, every lead we chased, every piece of evidence we uncovered, it all traced back to one moment. Luna, refusing to walk past that barn. Me, trusting her enough to follow. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd caught him that day, if he'd been at the barn when we arrived. Would it have ended differently? Would there have been violence? I don't know. What I do know is that the investigation Luna sparked saved more than just three children. It exposed a network, prevented future crimes, gave answers to families who'd been living in agonizing uncertainty. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But every day we got closer. Every day the net tightened. And I held on to the belief that justice, though sometimes slow, was still coming. Because three children were alive to wait for it. 6 months after that morning in the barn, I found myself standing in front of a room full of police officers, K-9 handlers, and trainers at the Regional Law Enforcement Conference. They'd asked me to speak about what happened, to share lessons learned. But as I looked out at all those faces, Luna sitting calmly at my side, I realized this wasn't just about one rescue or one case. This was about something we'd all witnessed, but maybe hadn't fully understood until that day. We think we know what our K-9 partners are capable of, I began, my hand resting on Luna's head. We put them through rigorous training. We test them on narcotics detection, explosives, tracking, apprehension. We certify them. We drill them. We measure their success rates. But here's what I learned in that barn. We don't know the half of it. I told them about Luna's behavior that morning, details I'd gone over 1,000 times but still gave me chills. How she'd frozen at a distance, where no trained tracking exercise would have picked up the children's scent through the barn walls. How she'd shown a determination that went beyond any command I could have given her. How she'd understood, on some level we still can't fully explain, that lives were at stake. The experts have theories, I continued. They say dogs can smell fear, can detect stress hormones in human sweat from remarkable distances. They say Luna probably picked up on minute changes in airflow, on scent particles drifting through cracks in that old barn. And maybe that's true. Probably is true. But I think it's more than that. A handler in the front row nodded, and I saw recognition in her eyes. She knew. They all knew, really, even if they couldn't put it into words. Our K-9 partners are working with senses we don't have, processing information we can't perceive. When we train them to detect drugs or explosives, we're just channeling a fraction of what they're actually capable of sensing. That day, Luna wasn't following training protocols. She was following something deeper, an instinct that told her something was desperately wrong and that she needed to act. I pulled up the statistics on the screen behind me. In the 6 months since the rescue, there had been a measurable shift in how K-9 units operated. More handlers were being trained to recognize and trust their dogs' unexplained alerts. More departments were reviewing cases where K-9s had shown interest in areas that were dismissed. And they were finding things. Not always children, thank God, but evidence. Bodies, crime scenes, things that might have stayed hidden if someone hadn't decided to trust their dog's instincts. Since Luna's rescue, K-9 units across the region have been credited with finding 4 missing persons, 2 of them alive, I said, my voice catching slightly. That's 4 families who have their loved ones back, at least in part because handlers remembered what Luna showed us. that our dogs see the world differently than we do, and sometimes we need to trust that difference even when we don't understand it. But it wasn't just about the rescues. The story had sparked a broader conversation about how we utilize canine units in law enforcement. Police departments were reconsidering their protocols, allowing more flexibility for handlers to pursue leads their dogs indicated. Search and rescue operations were being redesigned to give canines more autonomy. And perhaps most importantly, the bond between handler and dog was being recognized not as a liability or an emotional complication, but as a tactical advantage. Agent Carson from the FBI had shared something with me weeks after the rescue that I now shared with the room. We analyzed Luna's behavior from that morning using everything we knew about canine capabilities. By conventional understanding, she shouldn't have detected those children from where she was. The distance was too great, the barn too sealed, the conditions too poor. But she did detect them, which means we're underestimating what these animals can do. The FBI had since launched a study examining cases where canines had shown behavior their handlers couldn't explain. Alerts that didn't fit training parameters, persistence that seemed irrational, detections that defied conventional understanding. The preliminary findings were staggering. In over 60% of cases where handlers had trusted these anomalous alerts, something significant was found. Evidence, victims, suspects, things that changed the course of investigations. We're learning to listen better, I told the room. Not just to obey the training manuals, but to really observe our partners, to notice when they're telling us something that doesn't fit the script. I shared stories from other handlers who'd reached out after hearing about Luna. A canine in Oregon who'd insisted on searching a building that had already been cleared, leading to the discovery of a hidden room with trafficking victims. A dog in Texas who'd refused to leave a seemingly empty field, where cadaver teams later found remains that solved a 15-year-old cold case. A German Shepherd in Florida who'd alerted on a vehicle during a routine traffic stop, leading to the rescue of a kidnapped infant hidden in a modified compartment that should have been impossible for the dog to detect. Each story was a reminder. We'd been working alongside these incredible animals for decades, benefiting from their abilities, and yet we were still discovering the depth of what they could do. The thing about Luna, I said, looking down at her, is that she's not special. I mean, she's special to me. She's extraordinary to me. But in terms of capability, she's just a well-trained canine doing what canines do. Which means every dog in this room, every partner sitting beside you right now, has this same potential. We just have to be wise enough to recognize it and humble enough to follow where they lead. I shared the hardest lesson too, that Callaway was still out there. That despite the expanded investigation, the international manhunts, the evidence we'd gathered, he'd managed to disappear. It was a sobering reminder that even with all our technology, all our training, all our canine partners' incredible abilities, we couldn't win every time. Evil was patient and clever, but so was justice. The search continues, I said, and every day, canine units across the country are out there, working cases, following leads. Because of what Luna started, we're all a little more attentive, a little more willing to trust what our dogs are telling us. And that matters. Emily had sent me a letter that I now read to the room, my voice shaking slightly. She was in therapy, healing slowly but steadily. She'd written, "Luna saved my life, but she also taught me that sometimes the smallest voice, or bark, is the one that needs to be heard the most. I want to be like her when I grow up, brave and kind, and someone who helps people who can't help themselves." That's the legacy of what happened in that barn, I concluded. It's not just about 3 children who came home. It's about every handler in this room looking at their partner with fresh eyes. It's about departments rethinking how we deploy K-9 units. It's about recognition that these animals we work with aren't just tools or even just highly trained professionals. They're partners with capabilities that exceed our understanding, and they deserve our complete trust. After the presentation, handlers lined up to meet Luna, to hear more details, to share their own stories of times their dogs had known things they couldn't explain. I watched Luna accept their attention with her usual grace, and I marveled at how one morning, one decision to follow her into that barn had rippled out into something so much larger. A young handler, fresh out of training, approached with his new partner, a Belgian Malinois named Rex. "How do you know when to trust them versus when they're just distracted?" he asked. I knelt down and looked Rex in the eyes, then smiled up at his handler. "You learn to read them. Every signal, every posture, every look. And then one day, they'll show you something that doesn't make sense, that doesn't fit any training scenario you've practiced. And that's when you have to decide, do you trust the manual or do you trust your partner?" "What if I'm wrong?" he asked. "What if I follow my dog and there's nothing there?" "Then you've lost a few minutes," I said simply. "But if you don't follow and there is something there?" I let the sentence hang, knowing he'd understand. He nodded slowly, his hand moving to rest on Rex's head in a gesture that reminded me of myself with Luna. I'll remember that. As the conference ended and people filtered out, Detective Morrison pulled me aside. "They caught him," he said quietly. "Callaway. Border Patrol in Canada got him an hour ago. He's in custody." The relief that washed over me was so intense I had to sit down. Luna immediately pressed against me, sensing my emotion. "The kids," I managed to say. "Their families." "Already being notified," Morrison confirmed. "Trial will take time, but he's done. It's over." It wasn't really over, of course. There would be court dates, testimony, years of legal proceedings. The children would carry their scars. The families would always know how close they came to a different ending. But the monster who'd haunted our investigation, who'd made me check my rearview mirror obsessively for 6 months, who'd stolen peace from 3 families, he was caught. And it had all started with Luna, refusing to walk past a barn. I drove home that night with Luna in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window as she watched the world pass by. I thought about all the K-9s out there right now, working shifts, running patrols, using senses we barely understood to keep people safe. I thought about how many crimes had been solved, how many lives had been saved, how many tragedies had been prevented because someone trusted their dog. "You changed everything, girl," I told Luna softly. "You know that?" She looked at me with those deep brown eyes, and I swear she understood. Not just the words, but the weight of them, the significance of what she'd done and what it had started. As we pulled into my driveway, I made a silent promise. Not just to Luna, but to every K-9 and handler out there. I'd keep telling this story. I'd keep reminding people what these incredible animals were capable of. I'd keep fighting for better training, better resources, better recognition of the K-9 units that served alongside us. Because Luna had shown us something profound that morning in the barn. She'd reminded us that sometimes the most advanced technology, the most sophisticated training, the most comprehensive protocols, sometimes all of that is still less valuable than the simple act of trusting your partner. And in the end, that trust had saved 3 lives, caught a predator, and changed how we understood the remarkable animals we're privileged to work beside. That was Luna's gift to all of us. And it was a gift that would keep giving every single day with every K-9 unit out there doing what they do best. Being extraordinary.